The bass throbbed. Lights pulsed. Angela moved through the club like a phantom, a whirlwind of energy in a sea of faces. She was a creature of the night, her natural habitat the dance floor, her throne a plush VIP booth. Here, she reigned supreme. Her laughter, a cascading melody, cut through the music and the murmur of voices. She was the sun, and everyone else, planets caught in her gravitational pull. Tonight, she wore a dress that defied gravity. It shimmered, a second skin of sequins reflecting the strobing lights. It clung to her curves, a testament to her confidence, her power. Around her, eyes followed, hungry, envious, admiring. She met each gaze with a flick of her wrist, a tilt of her chin. They were moths drawn to her flame, and she, the eternal flame, burned on. She moved with an effortless grace, her body a language understood by all. Every sway of her hips, every flick of her wrist, spoke volumes. It was a dance of liberation, of raw, unadulterated freedom. The music coursed through her veins, a potent elixir that fueled her every move. She was alive, truly alive, in these fleeting moments on the dance floor. The insistent buzz of her phone was a familiar rhythm, a counterpoint to the club's soundtrack. It vibrated against the sleek surface of the table, a constant reminder of her other life. Angela, Queen of the Night, was also a digital empress, ruling a kingdom of pixels and followers. Her phone, an extension of herself, held the keys to her virtual domain. OnlyFans. The word itself held a certain power, a whispered promise of intimacy and allure. She was a master of this realm, a weaver of fantasies, a siren of the digital sea. Each notification, a testament to her influence, her ability to captivate and entice. Her followers, devoted subjects, hung on her every post, every like, every carefully curated glimpse into her world. It was a dangerous game, this dance between the real and the virtual. The line blurred, the boundaries fading with each passing night. But Angela thrived on the edge, on the intoxicating thrill of living life on her own terms. She was a modern-day goddess, worshipped in equal measure in the hallowed halls of nightclubs and the digital altars of social media. She took a sip of her drink, the taste bitter and sweet on her tongue. It matched the duality of her life, the constant push and pull between the real and the unreal. But tonight, she pushed those thoughts aside. Tonight, she was all about the music, the lights, the intoxicating freedom of the moment. The music swelled, a crescendo that vibrated through her bones. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the rhythm, her body moving instinctively. Around her, the crowd pulsed and swayed, a single organism driven by the beat. She was a part of them, yet separate, lost in her own world of music and movement. Angela's laughter rang out, echoing through the club. It was a siren's song, alluring, intoxicating, impossible to resist. Men, drawn to her like moths to a flame, gathered at the edge of the dance floor. Their eyes followed her every move, hungry, eager, hoping for a flicker of recognition. She saw them, a blur of faces and yearning gazes. But they held no interest for her, not tonight. Tonight she craved something more, something different. She wanted to lose herself in the music, in the anonymity of the crowd, to forget the weight of her virtual crown. She danced on, oblivious to the passage of time, fueled by the music and the heady freedom of the night. The club, her playground, her stage, her escape. And for now, that was all that mattered. The rest, the whispers, the expectations, the consequences, could wait. Tonight, she was free. The night spun on, a dizzying carousel of lights and sound. But as the hours wore on, a change rippled through Angela. A restlessness crept in, a subtle shift in her energy. The music, once exhilarating, now felt repetitive. The crowd, once a source of energy, now a suffocating presence. She craved something more, something to pierce the veil of the familiar. It was then, through the hazy smoke and strobing lights, that she saw him. Standing at the bar, his back to the crowd, he seemed detached, an observer in a world of participants. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a simple black shirt. Even from a distance, she could sense an aura of quiet intensity, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy that pulsed around them. He turned slightly, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. His were dark, intense, holding a depth that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a predatory gaze, nor one seeking to possess. It was curious, appraising, as if he saw through her carefully constructed facade into the heart of the woman beneath. In that instant, a spark ignited within her, a flicker of something dangerous and unknown. She couldn't explain the pull she felt, the magnetic force that drew her towards him. It was impulsive, reckless, everything she normally avoided. But tonight, the rules of her carefully orchestrated life seemed to dissolve into the haze of the club. Tonight, she was drawn to the unknown, to the mystery that emanated from him like heat from a flame. The music faded into the background as she made her way through the throng of dancers. Each step towards him felt charged, the air crackling with anticipation. As she got closer, she could make out the sharp angles of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell carelessly across his forehead. He was handsome, yes, but it was more than that. It was the air of quiet confidence, the hint of a challenge in his eyes that captivated her. He saw her approaching, and a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a practiced charm, but something genuine, a flicker of amusement that sparked a warmth in her chest. She realized she was holding her breath and let it out in a shaky exhale. The world seemed to shrink, the noise and chaos of the club fading away until only he remained in focus.
You have a way of commanding attention.
It wasn't a question, but an observation, spoken with a hint of admiration that surprised her. She was used to being noticed, desired, but there was something different in his gaze, something that made her feel seen rather than simply observed. Angela, and you have a way of standing out. Her voice was a little breathless. It was true. In a room full of people clamoring for attention, he exuded an effortless magnetism that drew her in. He chuckled, a low, throaty sound, and for a moment their eyes locked, a silent conversation passing between them. It was a dangerous game they were playing, a dance of attraction and unspoken desires.
Let's get out of here.
He murmured, leaning closer, his words barely audible above the pulsing music. The invitation hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Angela hesitated, a flicker of doubt momentarily clouding her judgment. This wasn't her usual script, this impulsive surrender to the moment. But something about him, the intensity of his gaze, the way he seemed to see right through her, chipped away at her carefully constructed walls. "Angela, where?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was a silly question, a formality in the face of the desire that thrummed through her veins. It didn't matter where. All that mattered was escaping the confines of the club, the judging eyes, the constant need for performance. With him, she felt a strange sense of anonymity, a freedom she hadn't realized she craved.
Somewhere quieter.
He replied, offering her his hand. She stared at it for a moment, his fingers long and strong, a stark contrast to her own manicured nails. It was a hand that spoke of strength, of purpose, a hand that could both protect and possess. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up her arm, and she knew in that instant that she had crossed a line, a point of no return. As they turned and walked away from the club, the music and the lights fading behind them, Angela felt a strange sense of exhilaration mixed with trepidation. She was stepping into the unknown, surrendering control, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, pierced through the gaps in the blinds, slicing through Angela's dreams. She stirred, a dull ache throbbing behind her eyes. Her mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, her tongue thick and dry. Groaning, she rolled over, pulling the thin sheet tighter around her naked body, seeking a few more precious moments of oblivion. As her senses slowly returned, she became aware of the unfamiliar surroundings. The room was small, sparsely furnished, with clothes strewn haphazardly across the floor. The air hung heavy with the stale scent of sex and cigarette smoke, a potent reminder of the night before. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she squeezed her eyes shut, willing it away. Memories, fragmented and hazy, flickered through her mind like scenes from a forgotten film. The club, the music, the stranger with the intense eyes. His name, what was his name? It eluded her, lost in the fog of tequila shots and reckless abandon. She remembered the way he looked at her, the way he touched her, the feeling of being desired, cherished, if only for a night. A wave of shame washed over her. What had she done? This wasn't her. This wasn't how she operated. She was Angela, the queen of control, the mistress of her own destiny. And yet, here she was, naked and vulnerable in a stranger's bed, the events of the previous night a blur in her mind. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up her throat. She had to get out of there, had to put as much distance between herself and this mistake as possible. Pushing back the sheets, she sat up too quickly, the room tilting precariously for a moment. Her head swam, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her temples, willing the dizziness to subside. Her gaze fell on her discarded clothes, a tangled mess on the floor. As she reached for her bra, her fingers brushed against something small and square in the pocket of her jeans. Her heart stuttered, a cold dread settling in the pit of her stomach. It couldn't be, could it? She'd been careful, hadn't she? The wrapper felt heavy in her hand, a tangible reminder of her recklessness. A wave of nausea, stronger this time, forced her to her feet. She stumbled towards the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before emptying the contents of her stomach. Each heave brought fresh waves of nausea, of self-disgust. How could she have been so stupid? As she splashed water on her face, catching her reflection in the grimy mirror, a terrifying thought whispered through her mind. What if? No, it was too soon, too impossible. She'd been late before, stressed, overworked. It was probably just that, just stress. She clung to that thought like a lifeline, pushing down the fear that threatened to consume her. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and denial. Angela threw herself into work, into her online persona, anything to distract herself from the nagging fear that had taken root in her mind. She ignored the missed calls from Lisa, her best friend and voice of reason, unable to face her, unable to face the truth that might be staring her in the face. She tried to convince herself it was just stress, just her body playing tricks on her. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed at her. The signs were impossible to ignore, the persistent nausea, the sudden aversion to her once beloved coffee, the overwhelming fatigue that clung to her like a shroud. Finally, after a week of living in a state of perpetual dread, Angela broke down and bought a pregnancy test. The act of purchasing it, of holding the sterile plastic stick in her hand, felt strangely surreal, like something that happened to other people, not to her. But the fear, the gnawing uncertainty was too much to bear. She locked herself in the bathroom, her hand trembling as she followed the instructions. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one an eternity. Then, there it was. 2 pink lines, stark and undeniable, staring back at her from the small window of the test. Pregnant. The 2 pink lines screamed at her, a life-altering message on a plastic stick. Pregnant. The word echoed in the sterile silence of her bathroom, bouncing off the tile walls like a trapped bird. Panic welled in her chest, threatening to suffocate her. She'd always thought of herself as invincible, a force of nature who dictated her own terms. But this was different. This was real. Her life, A whirlwind of parties, late nights, and carefully curated online chaos flashed before her eyes. A baby, a helpless, demanding being, didn't fit into that equation. Not now, not like this. The thought of giving up her freedom, her carefully constructed empire of self-indulgence, sent a shiver down her spine. She wouldn't think about it now. Not yet. Escaping into the familiar rhythm of her life, she buried the test deep in her bathroom trash can, a flimsy attempt to erase the truth. The insistent chirping of her phone, a notification from her OnlyFans account, served as a jarring reminder of her double life. She had an image to maintain, a brand to protect. Her followers, thirsty for her brand of escapism and carefully crafted vulnerability, wouldn't understand, wouldn't accept this new reality. And so, she plastered on a smile, the mask of the carefree party girl slipping back into place with practiced ease. The show, after all, must go on. Weeks morphed into months, the reality of her situation a dull ache in the back of her mind. Angela doubled down on her reckless lifestyle, the music louder, the drinks stronger, the nights blurring into a kaleidoscope of fleeting encounters. Each party, each empty conquest, served as a desperate attempt to outrun the truth growing within her. She ignored the subtle changes in her body, the growing curve of her belly disguised beneath strategically chosen outfits. Her online persona, carefully crafted to project an image of untouchable confidence, remained meticulously curated. Her followers, none the wiser, lapped up the illusion, their virtual praise fueling her descent into denial. The occasional pangs of guilt, the whispers of doubt that surfaced in the quiet moments before sleep, were quickly silenced with another drink, another hit, another fleeting distraction. She told herself she wasn't ready, that she wasn't cut out for motherhood, that it was her life, her body, her choice. And yet, sometimes, in the dead of night, when the music faded and the echoes of empty laughter died down, she would place a hesitant hand on her stomach, a strange mix of fear and wonder washing over her. It was a feeling she couldn't quite place, a stirring within the chaos, a silent plea for acknowledgement that she wasn't ready to face. Lisa watched with a growing sense of dread as Angela took another shot, the amber liquid disappearing down her throat in one swift gulp. The club pulsed around them, a cacophony of sound and movement that grated on Lisa's nerves. It had been months since their last real conversation, months of watching her best friend disappear down a rabbit hole of self-destruction. She couldn't stay silent any longer.
Angela, you need to slow down.
Her words were met with a blank stare. Angela's eyes glazed over, her focus lost somewhere in the pulsating crowd. Frustration, sharp and hot, surged through Lisa.
Don't you dare Lisa me right now. I'm fine. Everything is fine.
The denial was thick in her voice, a desperate attempt to cling to the illusion of control that was rapidly slipping away. Lisa reached out, her hand closing around Angela's wrist, the contact surprisingly firm.
This isn't a game, Angela. You can't keep doing this. You're pregnant, for God's sake.
The words hung in the air between them, a bomb exploding in the heart of their fragile reality. The sterile white walls of the delivery room seemed to close in on Angela, the silence deafening after hours of primal screams and frantic instructions. Her body, still buzzing with the remnants of pain and exhaustion, felt alien, disconnected from her mind, which raced with a cocktail of fear and relief. She had done it. She had brought life into the world. But at what cost? Through the haze of drugs and exhaustion, she saw him, her son. He lay swaddled in the nurse's arms, so small, so fragile, his features barely defined. But his eyes, wide and dark, held a startling clarity, a depth that seemed impossible for a newborn. She had expected a cry, the lusty wail of a life new to the world. Instead, there was only silence, an unsettling, heavy silence that pressed down on her chest, stealing her breath. A prickle of fear ran down her spine. Where was the gurgling cry, the instinctive rooting for her breast, the signs of life she had seen in countless movies, countless other mothers' experiences?
Why isn't he crying?
She rasped, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper in the stillness. The nurse, her face carefully neutral, offered a reassuring smile.
Some babies are just quiet, dear. He's perfectly healthy, just taking it all in.
But her words rang hollow, doing little to quell the unease that coiled in Angela's gut.
Why? Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity as Angela lay there, her gaze fixed on the silent bundle in the nurse's arms. She searched for any sign of movement, any indication that he was in fact breathing, alive. The silence, once unsettling, now morphed into something unbearable, a suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. And then it happened. So softly it was almost lost in the hum of the hospital machinery. A voice, high-pitched yet strangely clear, pierced the silence.
Why what, sweetheart? The single word, uttered with an unnerving clarity, sent a jolt of ice through Angela's veins. She sat up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs.
"Why did you do this to me?" The nurse cooed, her voice a soothing balm in the sterile room. But the baby ignored her, his gaze fixed on Angela, his dark eyes burning with an ancient wisdom that belied his newborn status.
He whispered, his voice gaining strength, each syllable laced with an accusation that cut deeper than any scream. The nurse gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Angela, her breath catching in her throat, stared at her son, her mind rebelling against the impossible. Babies didn't talk. It was simply a trick of her sleep-deprived mind, a cruel joke played by her subconscious. But deep down, a primal fear whispered a terrifying truth. This was no ordinary child.
"Do you even care?"
His words, sharp as shards of glass, shattered the illusion Angela had so carefully constructed around herself. The mask of indifference, the carefully cultivated persona of the untouchable party girl, crumbled away, leaving her raw, exposed, vulnerable. "Angela, I didn't..." she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of his gaze. How could she explain the unexplainable? How could she justify years of reckless choices, of selfish desires, to a being so new, so pure, and yet so clearly marked by a wisdom that transcended his physical form?
"You brought me into a world you never intended to share with me. You filled your body with poison, ignored my pleas, my kicks, my attempts to reach you through the fog of your own making."
Each accusation was a blow to her already fractured heart. As she looked at him, at the tiny life she had created, she saw not a helpless infant, but a mirror reflecting back the ugliness of her own choices. The weight of his words, spoken with the clarity of a soul who had seen too much, threatened to crush her. The weight of her son's words settled upon Angela like a physical burden. The hospital room, sterile and bright, suddenly felt suffocating. The scent of antiseptic, usually a reassuring smell of healing, now stung her nostrils, a constant reminder of the life she had so carelessly brought into the world. Her carefully constructed reality, a world of fleeting pleasures and self-gratification, lay shattered around her, the remnants as useless as broken toys. She had craved freedom, lived for the intoxicating rush of independence, the power of dictating her own terms. But now, staring into the accusing eyes of her newborn son, she realized the true price of her choices. Her freedom had come at the expense of another's, a life tethered to hers, forever marked by her reckless disregard. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who had meticulously crafted an online persona of strength and self-assurance, now felt like a terrified child herself, lost and alone in the face of a responsibility she felt ill-equipped to handle. The likes, the followers, the fleeting validation of the digital world seemed meaningless in the face of her son's silent judgment. Her gaze drifted towards the crib in the corner, where he lay sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. He seemed so peaceful now, the accusing silence replaced by the soft sounds of slumber. But the memory of his words, the disappointment in his eyes, lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the chasm that now separated them. The days after her son's birth were a blur of exhaustion and silent recrimination. Lisa, her initial anger replaced by a weary compassion, tried to offer support, but Angela found herself shrinking from her touch, her words. The guilt and shame that festered within her felt like a barrier, keeping everyone at arm's length. She named her son Elijah, a name that resonated with her newfound sense of spirituality, a desperate plea for guidance from a higher power. But the name felt heavy on her tongue, a constant reminder of the weight of her responsibility, the burden of his judgment. Elijah, true to his nature, rarely cried. He would lie in her arms, his dark eyes observing her with an unnerving intensity, his silence more unnerving than any tantrum. She yearned for him to scream, to rage, to express the emotions she herself bottled up behind a mask of stoic determination. But his silence was a constant echo of her own failings, a reminder of the chasm that separated them. She quit drinking, the thought of polluting her body, his body, abhorrent to her. The parties, the late nights, the carefully curated chaos of her former life now seemed like distant memories, relics of a past she was desperate to outrun. The digital world, once her escape, her source of validation, now felt shallow, meaningless. She deleted her OnlyFans account, the act both liberating and terrifying, a symbolic severing of ties with the life she once knew. Time, a relentless river, flowed on, carrying with it the remnants of Angela's old life. She poured all her energy into Elijah, her every action fueled by a desperate need to atone for her past transgressions. She learned to decipher his silences, to anticipate his needs, to find solace in the smallest of victories. The guilt and shame that had haunted her slowly began to recede, replaced by a fierce, unwavering love for her son. She watched him grow, marveling at his intelligence, his quiet strength, his uncanny ability to see through pretense and straight into the heart of matters. She found solace in unexpected places, in the quiet routine of their days, in the shared laughter over a silly cartoon, in the unconditional love that shone in his eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of her past threatened to pull her under, when his silence felt like a wall she couldn't penetrate. But she persevered, driven by a love so profound, so all-consuming, that it eclipsed the darkness of her past. She knew that earning his forgiveness would be a lifelong journey, a path paved with her own growth and transformation. And she was willing to walk that path, one shaky step at a time, for as long as it took, for as long as he allowed her to try. Years tumbled into each other like fallen dominoes. Elijah grew, each year marking him more distinctly from other children. His intelligence was startling, his grasp of complex concepts unnerving in one so young. He excelled in school, his teachers marveling at his abilities, yet he remained aloof, a solitary figure in the bustling hallways. Angela watched him from a distance, her heart a constant ache. She had traded the intoxicating highs of her old life for the quiet ache of longing for a touch, a smile, a word of forgiveness from the son who remained forever marked by her past. She had built a new life, a good life, filled with purpose and meaning. She volunteered at a local women's shelter, sharing her story, her struggles, her redemption, hoping to steer others away from the jagged rocks that had nearly shipwrecked her. Yet each night, as she tucked Elijah into bed, his silence echoed in the space between them, a constant reminder of the forgiveness that remained just out of reach. His childhood was a tapestry woven with her attempts to connect, and his polite but distant acceptance. He excelled in everything he touched, yet seemed untouched by the world around him. He was a beautiful, intricate puzzle box, and she, the one who had carelessly tossed the pieces, was left to pick up the fragments, praying she could somehow put him back together. One evening, as Angela sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the worn edges of a photo album, Elijah approached her. He stood silently for a moment, his gaze fixed on the photographs scattered across the tabletop. Images of his childhood, birthdays celebrated, milestones reached, all meticulously documented by a mother desperate to capture every fleeting moment. He picked up a photo taken on his first day of kindergarten. He was so small then, his backpack almost bigger than he was, his face a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Angela watched him, her breath caught in her throat, waiting for him to speak.
You look happy.
Angela's heart skipped a beat. It was a simple observation, yet it felt like a crack in the wall he had erected around himself, a flicker of light in the darkness.
I am.
He looked up at her then, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. The distance was still there, the years of hurt and resentment a tangible barrier between them. But in the depths of his dark eyes, she saw a flicker of something else. Curiosity, perhaps even a seed of understanding. Life, with its infinite capacity for both joy and pain, continued to unfold. Elijah grew into a young man, his intelligence matched by a quiet compassion that surprised those who didn't know him well. He remained reserved, his past a shadow that clung to him, but the coldness that had once defined him softened, replaced by a quiet melancholy. Angela learned to accept his forgiveness as a journey, not a destination. She cherished the small victories, a shared joke at the dinner table, a moment of vulnerability when he confided in her about a problem at school, the increasing frequency of his visits to her room at night, seeking comfort after a nightmare. She knew that the scars of her past would always be a part of him, just as they were a part of her. But she also knew that love, true and unwavering, had the power to heal even the deepest of wounds. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, echoes of the old pain. But she would be there, a steady presence in his life, a testament to the transformative power of redemption. She would love him unconditionally, supporting him, guiding him, allowing him the space to find his own path to forgiveness. For she had learned the hardest lesson of all. Forgiveness, like love, was a gift freely given, not a debt that could be repaid. And she would spend the rest of her days proving herself worthy of that gift, one precious moment at a time.